Jen, welcome back to the Healing After Infant Loss YouTube channel. Thank you so much for coming back. We have just recorded an episode talking all about your story. So without going into too much detail, would you like to give a little bit of an overview of your story and how you got into yoga, meditation and mindfulness?
I sure can. So my daughter was born after 2 rounds of IVF, and it was the second journey of trying to conceive that really threw me into the path of yoga. I had been a Pilates instructor for about 12 years, and yoga was never on my radar. But when we went through IVF again to have our second child and it didn't work, then I was sort of left in a place of not really knowing where to turn and not really knowing what else I could be doing to help myself. And yoga was something I really stumbled across. It was just mentioned to me in passing by a friend one day, and I had just not really very high hopes for a yoga practice being able to support my fertility journey in any way at all. But I thought I would give it a go, as one of those very type A, I will do anything kind of people. I thought I will give it a go. And after everything that I had been through in order to try and build my family, I ended up falling pregnant naturally. And we did experience a loss after that first natural pregnancy, but it was still something that I never thought was possible. I was told by doctors that I wouldn't be able to fall pregnant naturally. And, I had no evidence that it would ever happen for us, but it did. And this yoga practice was the only thing that I had changed in my life. So when that happened, I decided I wanted to learn a lot more about it. And I decided to become a yoga teacher and delve into all of these beautiful practices. And, I have an exercise science background, and I wanted to know why something as simple as yoga had such a profound effect on my body. So that's why I do the work that I do now.
And what did you learn from all that research, all that education? What is it about yoga that actually helps?
Oh, well, we can go into the sciencey stuff, but it really is it is a blend, I think, about the science and the spiritual side. And the science stuff is really very heavily researched, and even in terms of exercise and movement, but the way that yoga is able to do a lot more than that. So it's not just about the movement and the exercise and the increase in circulation and blood flow, and all of that is wonderful. But there aren't very many forms of yoga, or sorry, not very many forms of exercise, or just really anything that people come to on a regular basis that has this beautiful ability to bring you into a calm and regulated state. Because we live so much of our lives in this stressed kind of go, go, go mode where we never stop and slow down. We put ourselves at the very bottom of the to-do list, and it's just not something that we ever focus on. And so I think that the combination of all of that has a profound impact on your body physically. But then on top of that, there's this kind of unknown part that yoga introduces you to. And I'm not a religious person, but I became very spiritual when I started my yoga practice, and I still am. I think that when you are able to connect to something greater than yourself, it puts so much in perspective. And it's a gift, I think, as well. It really allows you to look at your journey from a completely different perspective.
I think a lot of people do fall back on their faith and religion in times, of infertility, things like that. I've watched a couple of episodes, podcasts, YouTube, things like that, where people say, it was God's plan that we had the miscarriage, or it's God's plan that this is happening. And I think when you're not religious, you almost miss that side of things. And I'm not at all religious. And again, I'm sort of similar, where I wouldn't say I'm spiritual, but I was sort of in the spiritual world when I was in Miami, with a lot of people doing yoga, meditation, cacao ceremonies, all the kind of woo-woo things. And it's an interesting sort of shift in your mindset of like, the universe has my back, or angels or God or whatever it is, but it sort of takes the responsibility away from yourself almost. And that, I don't know, it's really interesting mindset shift when you have that, when you if you don't have religion and then you do have spirituality to sort of come in and help with the mindset side of things.
It really does make a difference. You're right. When you say that, if you're not religious, it's like, well, where do you turn to get kind of that higher power. And I remember reading a study that was done on sort of ancient civilizations around the world and then smaller communities that are in more modern times. And the one thing that they all had in common, no matter where they were in the world, or what the ages of the people were, or what their community was about, is that they all were looking for a higher power, and all of them had a god or gods or something to guide them. And you see it everywhere in the world. And I don't like, it's no coincidence that that is what humans seek out.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. You said that obviously when people are trying to get pregnant, IVF, infertility, infant loss, there's a hell of a lot of stress that goes along with that. I wanted to ask you, how does stress affect fertility? And maybe it's a completely different answer, but also healing after loss. Like, how can
Mm.
stress affect your body, your hormones, sorry, your nervous system, all these different things?
Mm. Oh, it's such a big question. So, stress affects your body in a lot of different ways. And it's sort of like the chicken or the egg, isn't it? Were you a very stressed person and that's made maybe your journey of trying to conceive more difficult? Or have you become a very stressed person because your journey of trying to conceive has been difficult? And don't get me wrong, people who are stressed fall pregnant every day. We know women in war zones, women in abusive relationships, they fall pregnant every day. So you can absolutely get pregnant if you are chronically stressed, but it can make it a lot more difficult, and I'll explain why. But the biggest thing I think for me is that chronic stress makes your life miserable in so many different ways. And if there is something that you can do to help relieve that, I think that is where the real power lies. So, when we're talking about stress, I think most people will assume that stress is an emotion. It's something that they feel. We feel happiness or joy or sadness or anger, but stress is not an emotion. Stress is a physiological response that your body has to perceived danger. Your autonomic nervous system is constantly, every moment of your awake day, looking for signs of safety or danger. It's always on the lookout. And when you are in a prolonged state of stress, when you have a constant stressor in your life, it is on the lookout and finding all of these things that are, potentially threatening at every moment of the day. The problem is that you've got this little gland in your brain called the amygdala, which is kind of like the security guard, the watchtower. It's looking for these signs of, is this safe, is this dangerous? But your poor amygdala doesn't understand the difference between there's a tiger 50 meters away that's about to come and attack me and eat me. That is a life-threatening situation. Or I'm terrified that my pregnancy test tomorrow is going to be negative. Or last time I went to this doctor's clinic, I found out my baby died, and that's going to happen again, and my world's going to fall apart. Your brain only understands that both of these situations are stressful. It doesn't understand that one's life-threatening and one isn't. So your body reacts in exactly the same way as if it was a life-threatening situation. And you have no control over this. Your autonomic nervous system operates within a split second of a stressful situation arising, and it can be triggered from memory as well, which is where things like PTSD from loss comes into it. We can talk about that later. So when you are in a state of, okay, my brain has sensed that there is a threat here, I'm going to get ready to run or to fight. You're probably not going to fight the tiger because you'll probably lose, but you're going to get ready to run. And when you're in that state of fight or flight, your brain says, all right, what do we need right now in order to get out of this situation alive? We're going to need all of our muscles. We're going to need to, put some power into our hips. What don't we need? What can we kind of give up for a few minutes in order to conserve more energy to save our life? So things that you don't need in immediate survival are things like digestion. You don't really need to digest your lunch if you're running away from a tiger. You don't need to think critically. You don't need to solve a complex maths problem or play a chess game. You don't need to fight off a virus, so your immune system gives up some of its energy and shuts down. And you also don't need reproduction if you're fighting for your life. Your body is not going to prioritize ovulating or supporting a pregnancy if it thinks that you're in danger. So
Yeah.
this is all well and good if you have an acute stressor in your life. An acute stress is fine. It's something like, if you're walking across the road and a car comes out of nowhere, your brain goes, oop, dangerous situation, let's run, let's get out of the way. Stress goes away, your body returns back into its normal state. Stress is gone. But when you have a constant chronic stressor in your life, like infertility, or you've been through loss or recurrent loss, and there are things everywhere that trigger you, you are in this constant state of fight or flight all the time. And over a long period of time, we see things that, start to come up from a physiological level. We see gut issues because the digestive system isn't working so well. We see immune system issues. People get sick more easily or can't recover from colds. We see sleep going out the window. Sleep is enormously affected by chronic stress. And we see things like fertility issues as well. I have so many students that will come to me and say, look, I used to have a really regular cycle. It was 28 days. I would ovulate on day 14. It was super predictable. I had no PMS. A year or two into their journey of trying to conceive and things aren't going well, their cycle is all over the place. They don't know when they're going to ovulate. Their luteal phase, that 2-week wait, has become really short. They're getting awful PMS, heavy bleeding, sore boobs, headaches, mood swings, all of this. And when you look at the research of why all of these things happen to your body, a lot of it comes down to chronic stress. And it's really frustrating because, everywhere you turn, people are like, well, don't stress, you just need to relax a little bit more. It's like, yes, well, how the fuck do I do that while I'm going through all of this, right? One of the main stress hormones that you produce is cortisol. So cortisol is pumped out from your adrenal glands when you're in a stressful situation. And cortisol is amazing for getting your body ready to fight or to flee. But cortisol interrupts your body's ability to produce progesterone. They're made from the same precursor hormone. So if you are producing lots and lots of cortisol all the time, it makes it very hard for your body to produce progesterone. And that is essential for that beautiful, delicate dance that your hormones perform each month. It makes it hard to confirm regular ovulation, and it makes it really hard to have that consistent length of your cycle as well. So, gosh, I can talk about these things for a long time, but I hope that gives you an overview of how it really affects your body.
It does, and it's like you said, it takes over everything. And like you said at the beginning, people think that stress is just an emotion, but actually, when if I'm being honest, when I record these podcast episodes, my hands are still sweating. I've been talking to you for like an hour and a half now. My hands are still sweating. I run to the toilet beforehand and have. We don't need to talk about that, but like it is a physical thing in your body. Like you can physically, if you get butterflies, if you're nervous, you like it is a physical thing. It's not just like, oh, I'm stressed, I just need to think happy thoughts and I'll be okay. Like it is a real thing that actually affects your body and how you feel, but also how your body reacts to things. And I hadn't even thought about the fact that your reproductive system then doesn't work the way it's supposed to because it is in fight or flight, where it's just like, no, we don't need that. We're not making a baby because we're too stressed for this. And it's, yeah, I think you just really explained that really, really well.
And I think there's so much power in knowing that stress is not an emotion, right? When you're able to look at it and start recognizing all of these physical signs, like you said, the sweaty palms, the heart racing, the quick breath, when you start to notice all of these things, you can realize what stress is doing to you, and it starts to become much more within your control. So yeah, it's something I talk about a lot because it is one of those things. Well, yes, I need to stop stressing, but like how? And once you realize the effect it's having on your body and you notice that, you become aware, it changes everything.
Yeah. Which leads nicely onto my next question, which is how does yoga, breathwork, and mindfulness support stress reduction, but also well-being in general? And before you answer that question, sorry, I looked on your website and you referenced a study where they say that I'll leave it on screen maybe, but I'm not going to read the whole thing. But basically, when you do practices such as yoga, meditation, and mindfulness, you reduce anxiety, depression, stress, the rate of assisted vaginal delivery, you improve fetal outcomes, It helps with fertility. Like, there are studies that prove this. It isn't just that, yoga mindfulness is really, it's cute and funny. You should try it sometime. Like, no, it actually does help. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And I think that's always great when you can back it up with science and research, right? One of my favorite
Yes.
studies that was done was by a woman named Alice Domer out of the Harvard Mind Body Institute in the US. And she took a whole bunch of women who were going through IVF and she gave them some mindfulness techniques. And I think there was a variety of, deep breathing, coming into presence, some somatic touch type exercises. She had a few that she did with them. And obviously, she had a control group that did nothing. And the ones that went through these mindfulness techniques had pregnancies of a rate 3 times greater than those who didn't. It's mind blowing. And it's stuff
Yeah.
that, it's not costing you tens of thousands of dollars. It's not, taking you hours and hours out of your day. It really is when you look at studies like that, and there's a few that are similar, it just makes you realize what are we doing?
Yeah.
Why is the IVF treatments our first port of call? So I think there's a lot of things. So yoga in particular, as I sort of mentioned before, it does kind of fall under that exercise category. And, the benefits of exercise are widely researched and extensively studied. One of the best things about yoga is the way in which we increase circulation and blood flow. And we know that blood is the body's delivery system for nutrients and for hormones. So without good circulation, you can't get all of those nutrients and hormones to where they need to go. But the wonderful thing about yoga, as opposed to just like walking or running, is that we are doing specific poses to open out areas in the body that are feeling tense or tight and where there might be a little bit of stagnant or stuck energy. And we're also doing poses that bring blood flow to the brain. Anything you do that's an inversion where your hips are higher than your heart, like a downward dog, like legs up the wall, a bridge pose, anything simple like that. When you reverse that blood flow, you send all of that fresh, nourished blood towards the thyroid gland, to the hypothalamus, to the pituitary gland, and it allows all of those areas to then send that blood back to where it needs to go. And if you think about it, there's not many forms of exercise that we do where we invert ourselves, where we're swimming, we're
Mm.
running, we're cycling, we're going to the gym. Very, very rarely do you put yourself in an inversion. So those are incredibly powerful in yoga. The other thing that yoga does that moves past just exercise is its ability to bring you into your parasympathetic nervous system. Exercise generally is quite stimulating and quite activating. So it activates your sympathetic nervous system, which is where your stress response then starts from. And there's nothing wrong with that when it's a controlled kind of, stress. When you're going to the gym and doing a HIIT workout, if you're going to a hot yoga class, something that's like really, really intense, that is very stressful on your body. And whilst it's
Mhm.
controlled stress, it is still producing the same hormones and what have you. So we kind of need to be careful about those types of exercise that we're doing when we're trying to conceive. But a yoga practice, not hot yoga, I should mention, is very, very good at bringing you into your parasympathetic nervous system. And that's where it's kind of called the rest and digest state. It's where your brain goes, oh, okay, there's nothing that we need to stress about here. There's no imminent threat. We can bring all of those processes back online. We can start digesting our dinner. We can kickstart reproduction. All the hormones are able to synchronize a lot more easily. You produce melatonin a lot more easily as well, which then assists with sleep. So putting those things together, I think, makes it a truly magical combination.
Yeah, it's incredible. We need to. It's one of those things as well that it's like, why aren't we talking about this enough? And I'm not trying to put it on you as like you need to tell everyone, but like,
That's why I talk
why are
about it every
doctors not
day. Don't worry.
recommending? Yeah, but like, why are doctors not prescribing yoga and meditation and mindfulness versus a boatload of like injections and pills? Like, not that to say they don't work and that's not also valid, but why can't we maybe do both and have that as an option versus, people stumbling into yoga and, sort of finding out, oh, well, this helps. And I didn't really know why it helps. And, a bit like my story I shared in the last episode where I would go to yoga and I didn't really know why I felt certain things. And it was only when I did my yoga teacher training that I realized, all these things you're explaining amazingly, like very clear, I love the way you're explaining all this. But, I sort of stumbled into it without knowing that it could actually help with healing, but also, with fertility and all these different things. Like it's, why are we not talking about this enough? I don't know. It's frustrating, but
It is frustrating. And the very small number of doctors that I have come across who are talking about it, their success rates are incredible. They are through the roof. It just, I was speaking to one fertility doctor last week who is based in Canada. He has a naturopath in every one of his clinics, and he recommends mindfulness or meditation or yoga programs to all of his patients. And his results are amazing. And he just looks at it as, well, this just makes sense. It makes my patients happier. It means more people want to come to my clinic because we get such great results. And like exactly as you said, Rosie, why can't we do both?
yeah. And it's science backed as well. I think a lot of people think yoga and mindfulness is a bit woo woo and a bit, hippy dippy and whatever, and it's not for me. And, that whole thing, which, yes, it completely can be all of that woo woo stuff, but it also can be very normal and accessible to a lot of people. It doesn't have to be spiritual, find your flow, and, all these sort of, it can be very practical and very like, for regular everyday people who aren't into that spiritual side, it can be accessible, which I think is also something we need to talk about and share more often.
Completely agree.
So if we talk about breath work, could you talk about what is breath work for people that don't know, and how can it help regulate people's emotions and their stress levels?
So, breathwork is controlled breathing, basically, to put it very, very simply. If we had to think about breathing every moment of the day, could you imagine? We wouldn't last very long. If we had to think about keeping our heart beating or our lunch digesting or, our liver cleansing out whatever if we had to think about any of that, we would have died a long time ago. So, we have this amazing thing called our autonomic nervous system that just does it for us. But as I said before, the problem with your autonomic nervous system is it reacts to stressful things that aren't life threatening. And that's where things become problematic. And you have no control over that. All of these things, the sweaty palms, the irritability, you can't sit still, your heart's racing. You can't control that response. But the one thing you do have control of at any moment of your day is your breath. And it is your ticket to regulation and to overriding your stress response. So if you think about what happens to your breath when you're stressed, you tend to breathe very shallowly. And a natural breath involves an inhale with a pause and then an exhale and a pause. Those pauses get cut out. So we just breathe in, out, in, out, in, out. We tend to breathe very rapidly. Heart rate starts to increase. If we can do the complete opposite to that in the moment, we can come out of our stress response easily. So the counter to that would be slow breathing, especially on the exhale. That's what starts to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's just a wonderful calming way to bring you back to a state of feeling less overwhelmed. And breath work, I think, can be used in that way, in an acute state, but I think it becomes more powerful when you use it when you're regulated. So, right now, you and I just kind of sat here having a nice chat. We're not particularly stressed. If we were to do breath work now, that's when the body starts to really reap the benefits, because you develop this thing called vagal tone, where your vagus nerve actually becomes more resilient and stronger. And when you are then next faced with a stressful situation, the reaction that your body has isn't as intense. So breathwork is so, so powerful. And we use it to, like I said, calm that stress response and to allow people to really remind their bodies and their brains that they are safe and that, now is an excellent time to conceive and that there is nothing to be fearful of. But there's another side to breathwork that I think is becoming more and more popular, and it's often referred to as transformational breathwork or rebirthing breath. You may have seen videos online of people like lying on their backs, like writhing around, shaking and screaming and crying. This is a different type of breathwork, and it is kind of like putting yourself in a controlled stress response, but in a very, very safe environment. And when you do that, your nervous system goes, okay, well, I'm stressed, but my body is physically safe. What am I going to do with all of that kind of pent up stress and emotion? I'm going to let it go. And so your body comes into this place where it allows you to release a lot of what you've been storing and what you've been through. So breath work
Mm.
is so powerful. If you do one thing this week, go and do some breath work. Honestly, it's just
Yeah.
magic.
I think breathwork is one of those things as well that you can do without anyone particularly knowing you're doing it. You
Mm,
know, certain exercise, and there's different ones where they're a bit more obvious, but there are certain ones where you can just, you know, if you're sat on a train, you can do breath work. If you're at the office, you can do breath work. If you're on the toilet, you can do breath work. If you're watching TV, guess what? You can do breath work. Like, you can
so
kind of
true.
incorporate it into your life without getting changed, without rolling out the yoga mat, without going to a studio, without
Mm,
paying someone. Like, as soon as you know one or two techniques that work for you can kind of do it as and when you want to. And I often do it before bed. If I'm sort of, my brain's going a bit active, I'll focus on my breath and really try and calm myself down. So I wanted to ask, is there a technique that you would recommend that's relatively easy to teach now, just for people to try at home and just sort of remember and come back to, and to save this video and think, oh, I'll do that breath work that Jen said, and I'll just go through it myself while I'm feeling stressed at the moment. Do you have something that you could share for us?
absolutely. There's two. So if you are stressed, if you're waiting for a phone call or you're waiting for a scan or just something's happened, you've been triggered by a pregnant person and you're feeling that stress response, I like what we call the 4-7-8 breath. So you inhale for a count of 4, you hold your breath for a count of 7, and then you exhale to a count of 8. And that very slow, controlled exhale is what switches you from that stress response into the relaxation response. And it isn't going to happen on the first breath. You might need to do it sort of, 10 times, maybe for a couple of minutes. Maybe you need to then come back to it and do it again. But that really controlled, slow exhale is incredibly powerful. The other one that I like to give people when they are in a regulated state, just to increase that vagal tone and to increase their nervous system's capacity for stress later on, is to do something we call the heart coherence breath. And that's where you inhale and exhale for the exact same amount of time. And that's a really
Mm-hmm.
calming way to align your mind with your body. So it can usually around 5 or 6 seconds, you just inhale for 5 seconds and then exhale for 5 seconds. And you just keep going in that slow rhythm without any pause at the top or the bottom of the breath. And when you can coordinate kind of breath in time with, that slow counting, your nervous system finds that incredibly soothing and calming. And if you do sort of that 5 or 6 second inhale, exhale, you're bringing your heart rate to about 60 beats per minute, ideally, which is a very, what's the word? It would be considered quite a healthy and fit heart rate for many people if you went to a doctor and had it tested. So it's a sign that your body everything is well and everything is at ease.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. So then if we talk about yoga, obviously this takes a little bit more time and preparation, rolling out a yoga mat, maybe putting on a YouTube video, but could you talk to us about how yoga does help with infertility or IVF and things like that, but also with healing after loss?
Mm. Oh, there's so many things. And, we talk about using breath work and meditation and movement, but when you bring them all together, oh, like that is where the magic happens, honestly. And your nervous system finds movement coordinated with breath incredibly calming. And it can be, as simple as 10 or 15 minutes. I mean, you don't need to allocate a whole hour to a yoga practice. I would rather, my students did a 10-minute practice 3 or 4 times a week than 1 hour once a week. It's that
Yeah.
consistency and that sort of regular reminder to your body that it is okay just to move and to breathe and to let out everything it needs to let go of is so, so beneficial. I think when we're talking about fertility yoga, something I get asked a lot is, how is it different to like normal yoga? And the answer to that is, it doesn't look any different. If you see like a fertility yoga class, you're not going to think, okay, that looks weird and different. It's not something that I've made up or that anyone else has made up. The thing that makes it different is that we match the poses and the practices to each phase of the menstrual cycle. So that is something that is very, very beneficial to your hormones and just your overall mood and to your health, really. And so we look at, during our bleed, during menstruation, that's a time for rest and restorative poses, really gentle movements. As we work through to the follicular phase into ovulation, we bring a lot more energy and a lot more heat into the practice. So a lot more warrior poses, a lot more standing up, coming back down. And then in that luteal phase, or that 2-week wait, we start to bring the practice back down to a more gentle place again. So still encouraging lots of movement and good blood flow, but again, not pushing the body, just really working with that kind of decrease in the level of hormones. So that's how it supports your body physically. But you mentioned how it can be supportive after loss. And I feel like the what you go through on this journey, I mean, even just going to an IVF clinic can be traumatic and is a lot on your body. The things that are done to your body when you're going through fertility treatments is a lot, and it's not to be discounted. And then you put on top of that pregnancy loss or multiple losses, and it is just so much to go through. And the thing we don't realize is that, we go through all the emotions and everything, but our body goes through that as well. And it has its own memory and its own way of storing what it's been through. When you are stressed, one of the first things that happens is that we tend to tighten up and tense our hips. So our hip flexors, our pelvic floor, our abdomen become very tight because you need those muscles if you're about to run or to fight. And so when you are in a stressful state, like all the time, over and over and over again, and you keep getting triggered, these areas become very, very tight. So when we get on the yoga mat and we do hip openers, pigeon pose is one of the, the ones I see that this happens the most. People get really emotional because they think, well, I'm fine, I'm cool, I'm here to do my yoga practice, this is great. And then all of a sudden they're crying. Like, why am I crying? Because your body is letting go of what it's been holding on to, and it wasn't given the opportunity to do that until now. And we're not taught to do that. We were taught to go and talk about our problems and, find someone to discuss it with. But, your body needs to be able to let go as well. And that's how it can really help us heal from some of these things and from loss as well.
I completely relate to what you said there, because I think I said in the previous episode that, I went to yoga thinking I'd be like some cool yoga girl, and then actually I'm crying in the yoga poses, and I didn't really know why I was crying. But now I sort of, after doing some trainings and learnings, I sort of realize it is about just releasing the tension and the trauma that's like stored in the body. Is there one yoga pose that you would recommend people to do, like if they're brand new to yoga, or even if they're a seasoned yogi? Is there something where you think, okay, try and do this every day, that would be great, it'd be a good start, something to sort of add to the morning routine or night routine or whatever it is?
Totally. Legs up the wall. So it's called Viparita Karani in yoga. And it is so simple. You can do it at any stage of your cycle. It's safe if you're going through fertility treatments. Lie on your back with your legs extended up a wall. You can move back away from the wall a little bit if your legs are tight, your hamstrings are tight. But if you can stay there for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes maximum, and what that does is it takes all of the blood flow from your legs, which contain the biggest muscles in your body, and it sends all of that beautiful blood flow down towards the uterus, the reproductive hormones, sends it back towards the heart. And being in that very gentle inversion is such a calming thing for your nervous system to do. It's very hard to be stressed when you're lying on your back with your legs up the wall. Like, your brain recognizes pretty quickly that there's nothing to be afraid of. And if you combine that with, say, some beautiful soothing music, or you put on some like relaxing essential oils, or do it for 10 minutes before you go to bed, it's heaven.
I have to try that tonight.
Yeah.
If we now move on to mindfulness, which is another part of your work and what you do, how does mindfulness help with grief after loss?
I think the thing that really we struggle with grief after loss is that we're stuck in the past, and we find that depression is usually defined as, we struggle to let go of the past, and then anxiety is struggle to face our future. We're caught between the two. The one thing that we don't address is the present moment. And as hard as that is, and yes, your memories are going to keep coming, and your anxieties about the future are going to keep coming. But all that mindfulness really is about is presence. And in this present moment, what can you see? What can you feel? What can you hear? What can you taste? What's the temperature? How does your body feel? When you're able to come into presence, the more we are able to do that, the more we can start to look at what we've been through and know that it's a part of our journey, but it's not our current reality. And, I think that when we're talking about recovering from loss, there's a lot of, we need to address, post-traumatic stress disorder and, a lot of anxiety that comes from going through something like that. But trauma recovery is a lot to do with reminding your body that it is safe in the present moment. So I think that's where mindfulness really plays a big part.
I think mindfulness is also one of those things a bit like breath work, where you can do it wherever, whenever, and no one knows you're doing it. So we've sort like me and my husband have done a couple of meditations and different things, and one of them we did was a walking meditation where you literally say, you walk really slow, you say, I am walking, I am walking, I am walking, I am stopping, I am stopping, I am stopping, and then you like, I am lifting my foot. And it was about 3 hours, I think, in Thailand somewhere. I was going a little bit bananas by the end of it, but like just being so insanely present on like, what am I doing? What am I like? Where are my clothes touching my body? What is my hair doing? Like, can I feel the breeze, or what, are my feet on a hard surface or a soft surface? Like, there's so many little things you can notice about your surroundings and your body and yourself, but you can do it all the time without anyone knowing. So again, it's like the breath work, where it's not this big thing, this big gestures, big whatever. It's more like internal, and it's kind of easy to do once you know what you're doing and what you're looking for, which I think is a really good thing as well, because it's so accessible.
It is. It's anything. I mean, you can just rub your hands together. Like, let's see how the fingertips feel against your palms, your arms. That's all
Yeah.
mindfulness. Anything that brings you into presence. And you're right, 3 hours is probably a lot. But it's when do we do that? When do we actually go,
Yeah.
we're not, rushing from one place to the next? Or how often have you been driving home and you don't even remember the last three turnings because you're just on autopilot? Like, it's something that we don't, again, we're not taught, and it's not something that is just
Mm.
normal to us.
Is there a mindfulness practice that you would like to share, like one in particular that you think is sort of a go-to for beginners, or just something that people can watch and try at home for themselves?
I love the body scan. And again, it's something you can do anywhere, anytime, where you just scan down through your body, start at the crown of the head and just notice. Notice your brow, your cheeks, your jaw, your neck, your shoulders. Scan down through your whole body and don't label anything good or bad. If you notice there is tension in any of those areas, perhaps actively release it. Just let it go. Maybe you were clenching your jaw and you didn't realize. Maybe you were tightening up your belly. You didn't need to. Maybe your hips were feeling tight. Whatever it might be, I think that's my favorite one.
Yeah. I sometimes notice I hold a lot of tension either in my shoulders. Sometimes I'm like this and I have to like, okay, relax. But also I'll find myself working sometimes and my mouth is like tense. And I sort of notice and I'm like, okay, relax your mouth. That's not helping. You work harder. But it's funny when you start to realize these things of like where you hold tension, because for people it's, you hold tension in different places. But it's quite interesting when you do realize like, oh, my mouth is like really like pouty almost.
So true. So
um
common.
yeah. I would love to ask you about somatic experiencing. Could you talk to us about what that is? I've heard the word, I've seen Dr. Peter Levine talking about VU breathing, and that's about as far as I've gotten with it. So I don't know much. So I'd love to be educated. What is it?
Mm. So, somatic work or somatic experiencing, it sounds really fancy, but literally it is anything that is to do with your physical body. So,
Okay.
somatic exercises can be breath work, they can be yoga, they can be walking in nature, they can be havening, that practice I mentioned before where you gently, rub your hands against your skin and you just feel that sort of gentle touch. Somatic work is really anything that brings you into connection with your body. So, again, this is not something that we are taught to do. And I had spent many years on a fertility journey where, I was going to all the appointments and doing all the injections and taking all the best supplements. But at no point did I ever consider for a moment to ask how my body felt. I was just like, well, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to push my body to make this happen. But somatic work really brings you into connection with your body and allows you to ask your body, like, how are you feeling? Is this working?
Mm.
What don't I know? And this sounds really woo and a bit weird, but the first time I did a yoga practice when I was struggling to conceive, my teacher had me just sit in meditation for a few minutes at the end of the practice. And she said to me, I want you to ask your body if she has any messages for you. And I'm like, all right, whatever. So I did that. And no joke, Rosie, clear as day, the loudest words came into my mind that said, you never gave me a chance. And like, where did these words come from? My body was like screaming for me to listen. And I think that, we put all of our faith into medical treatments and to, all the injections and doing all the procedures, but sometimes our body just knows what it needs. And whether that is a break from treatments, maybe it's a break before you try again after you've lost a baby. If you just give your body a chance to tell you, it will tell you. And, that's what you were talking about before when you start to do certain yoga poses and emotions come up. That's your body talking to you. It's saying, this is what I needed to let go. I don't need to hold this anymore. Thank you. And gosh, it's powerful. And when people get that, when they start to feel it for themselves, it's just like the biggest sigh of relief. So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
a big fancy word for something very simple.
Well, thank you for sharing. The last thing I wanted to ask you about was PTSD, and I guess this could cover a couple of different things. So, like PTSD from loss, PTSD from IVF and infertility, PTSD from anything to do with infant loss, healing, all that kind of thing. Do you want to talk to us about PTSD, what it is, how it shows up, how people can know they've got PTSD, how you can heal from PTSD, any info that you have?
So, trauma is defined as anything that was too much or too overwhelming for your system to deal with. And instead of, I mentioned before that example of, if you're crossing the road and a car comes out of nowhere and you jump out of the way,
Yeah.
we could call that a complete stress cycle or a complete stress response where everything's fine, a stressor comes along or a threat comes along, you react, and then you go back to regulation. We see it in nature with animals all the time. You see the gazelle running away from the lion, and then the gazelle escapes. They might shake their body a little bit, and then they go back to eating some grass. Like, they don't care about the lion. They don't have PTSD. They're good. But the
Yeah.
problem is when you don't complete the stress cycle. So it's too much for your body to deal with. And we see this a lot with loss. And, imagine you are in a doctor's clinic and you are told that your baby has no heartbeat. What do? You can't run, you can't fight, like, you can't do anything. You're stuck. You're basically a prisoner in your own trauma. We shut down, we go into this, what we call a dorsal state, which is sort of like a freeze response where we think we want to do something but we can't. We're stuck in this, and this is something that happens in many different ways. And it can come from experiences in our childhood, and then things that we go through on our journey of trying to become parents triggers that, and it starts the process again. So the trauma cycle is something that we can only break when we recognize it. So you would know that you have PTSD if normal things throughout your day are not very possible for you, or things that are normal for other people are not possible for you. So, going to the doctor. If you mentioned before, Rosie, how after you had, a horrible termination, a late term termination, you found it really hard to go back to the hospital. And, if I was to walk into that hospital, I wouldn't think, for 2 seconds about walking straight in. It doesn't affect me. But things like that become very, very difficult. You know that something's going on. Or if you notice that you have very, very big overreactions to very small things where your response doesn't fit the situation. For example, I remember when I was struggling through IVF for the third time, I had an acupuncture appointment one day, and I went along, and for whatever reason, they didn't have my appointment. And if that happened to a normal person, your response would be like, oh, okay, well, that's a bit annoying, but let's rebook, whatever. My
Yeah.
response in that situation was to have a complete meltdown, complete tantrum. I was on the floor crying. Someone had to bring me a bottle of water, like ridiculous. So my response really didn't fit the situation. And you know that you are being triggered by something that is quite
Mm.
traumatizing and whatever that might be. And the thing I want to mention about some of these healing modalities like yoga and breathwork, you don't need to go into the memories of what has happened to you. You don't even need to know what's triggered you. You know, when you get triggered by something someone says or something that you see, and another person who's trying to conceive isn't triggered by that, doesn't matter why. Your body doesn't really need to go into memories. Your body will let go in the way that it needs to let go. And sometimes memories will come up. But like you said, when you were in your yoga practice and all of a sudden, you're just crying, doing a pigeon pose,
Mm.
you don't need to know where that emotion has come from. Just trust that your body is ready to let go of it. So I hope that helps answer your question. PTSD and trauma is a very big topic, and very
Mm.
individual as well. It's really important to work, I think, with a practitioner that is trauma informed and trauma trained and really understands the impact that it has on your body.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. A couple more questions, then I'll let you go because I've had you for a long time now. What advice do you have for somebody who wants to start yoga, meditation, and breath work, but maybe they feel overwhelmed or scared, or they're not quite sure how to start? That they hear all these wonderful things, but they're like, "Oh, I don't know what to do." What would you sort of
Oh,
advise?
just start small, 5 minutes a day. Put a timer on your phone, close your eyes, just breathe. Just see if you can focus on your breath for 5 minutes. That's where I like to start. I have a free fertility yoga guide. If you've never tried any of
Mhm.
these practices before and you want to kind of see what it's all about. So there are 4 practices for each phase of your menstrual cycle. So you can kind of see how it all fits in and how it all works. And there are some meditations and some breathwork exercises contained in that guide as well. So I'll send you the link. That's a really lovely, easy, gentle way to get started.
And then you also offer courses and one-on-one things. Want to talk more about the work that you do and how you help people?
Of course, if it's something that you'd like to delve into a little bit more deeply, and I always recommend like download my free guide first, because when it
Yeah.
comes to yoga, I think it really is all about the teacher and you have to vibe with them. So if you find that my style is something that resonates with you, then I do have self-paced courses that you can do in the comfort of your own home at any time of the day or throughout the week that you like. Supports you through your cycle and also through treatments like IUIs and IVF cycles. And if you want to go just a little bit more guided, I do have a group training program and I do offer one-on-ones as well, where you can just connect with me a little bit more face to face and connect with others on this journey as well.
Well, thank you so, so much for sharing all of that wonderful wisdom. You explained it so clearly, like so clear and calm and concise, and I've just really got it. Like I've done a teacher training, I've done a lot of these trauma informed stuff as well. So I sort of know a bit about it, but the way that you explain it is so amazing. So thank you so, so much for sharing that with myself and also with my audience of people watching.
Oh,
I really
thank you,
appreciate it. Thank you
Rosie.
so much.
I can ramble about these things for a long time, so I do wonder how concise it is sometimes. So thank you.
No, you did a good job. You did good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, love.